Thank you everyone for joining us. We'll get started with Professor Stuart Brodsky leading this panel, and I'll let him introduce his panelists.
James, thank you very much. And good afternoon, everyone. Good morning to, I imagine, a variety of people, considering how many people we have on the call here. My name is Stuart Brodsky, and I'm a clinical assistant faculty member, assistant professor at the Schack Institute of Real Estate, which is School of Real Estate at New York University School of Professional Studies. We're actually the largest school of real estate in the United States, and we have tremendous program largely on the graduate level, but also on the undergraduate level in real estate and real estate finance and in construction management. Today, I'm holding this panel discussion with some esteemed industry leaders to discuss sustainable real estate in the post-COVID-19 environment. I'm very pleased to have today Eric Duchon from LaSalle Investment Management, Chris Cayten from CodeGreen Solutions, and Dana Schneider from Empire State Realty Trust. And we're going to discuss the work that they are engaged in the context of responding to climate change and the new responsibilities that have come on the table as a result of the global pandemic. I want to frame this discussion by referring to an article, an editorial that I read recently in the Financial Times called, "Can We Both Tackle Climate Change and Build a COVID-19 Recovery?" And in this article, the author, Cristina Figueres from the American Enterprise Institute, a fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, says that the next 10 years will determine whether we stand any chance of preventing the worst impacts of climate change on orders of magnitude worse than the COVID-19 disruption. By 2030, if we have not cut greenhouse gas emissions by half globally, we will not be able to avoid the devastating tipping points that would shatter the global economy and pose existential human threats. The cost of inaction are staggering, representing nearly $600 trillion by the end of the next century. And in that context, the policies that we pursue now and the work that we do to address COVID-19 represent an effort that recognizes the power of the natural environment and recognizes the need for us to establish policies and public spending programs that are both equitable and address all of our challenges. In that context, I look forward to the conversation that we have with our panelists. And I would like to start by asking each of the panelists to take a moment to describe their organization in terms of size and scope of portfolio, the scope of their work in the field of sustainability and green building. And from there, we'll evolve the conversation to talk about what they're doing now in the context of COVID-19 and how that overlaps with sustainability and green building. But to start the introduction, I ask Eric Duchon to talk about LaSalle Invest Partners, and I'll pull up a brief PowerPoint presentation to go along with Eric's introduction. So Eric, if you're available.
Thank you. So while Stuart pulls that up, I'll just start right in. It is easiest to discuss LaSalle since we are quite large, with a little bit of a global overview slide backdrop that our investor relations team prepares. So as Stuart mentioned, I'm Eric Duchon. I'm the global head of sustainability for LaSalle Investment Management. We are one of the world's largest investment managers. You can go to the next slide, Stuart. With approximately $65 billion in assets under management across our global portfolio. We've grown quite a bit in the past few years with over 900 employees across 22 offices in 15 countries, and we actually invest in more countries than just those 15. Next slide, please. One thing I like to point out is that LaSalle is a sister company of JLL. A lot of folks, and I see Dan smiling there, a lot of folks think that we are the exact same company, which we are both subsidiaries of the Fortune 500 listed company, Jones Lang LaSalle Incorporated. We are the investment management arm, so working with a number of investor clients, if you can go to the next slide, across the world to manage their capital and bring them back a return. We have over 500 investors in over 30 countries. And I don't say that to show how big and great we are, but to show how diverse our client base really is, with different types of investors between pension funds, insurance companies, endowments, family offices, fund to funds. So even competitors are investing in some of our funds, and high net worth individuals across countries all over the world, and even the US, pension funds around the country in different states that have different drivers. We have a number of different requests and a number of different investor interests. And when it comes to sustainability, I would say that's really all over the board. We have some investors that are aligned with the Paris Agreement, some that are signed up to the Net Zero Owners Alliance, and then we have some that don't even know what the acronym ESG means. Next slide, please. I just like to show this slide from a portfolio perspective to demonstrate that our investment portfolio is truly diverse, whether it's across our private equity regional businesses, in our public real estate securities investing business, so investing in perhaps REITs like Empire State Realty Trust, and we also have a fund of funds and indirect business. We do have a very diversified portfolio in terms of property type as well. So with the largest portion of it being office, generally because offices are the most expensive property type out there. I would say from a number of assets, we might actually exceed the number of office assets that we have in the multifamily, industrial, or retail spaces alone. And each one of these property types has different requirements across the board, and especially from an ESG perspective, as you talk about level of operational control and what kind of efficiency and change you're able to affect. Next slide. Just a brief overview of our global sustainability efforts. We've been very active in this space for a number of years. Our ESG policy was formed in 2009 when we became a signatory to the UN Principles for Responsible Investment. And we've been submitting to that annual assessment for many years. The past 4 years now, we've achieved an A+ in the strategy and governance module, demonstrating how incorporated responsible investing practices are into our investment strategy. And just last year in 2019, we were able to bump up our property module score from an A to an A+, really demonstrating that we're implementing this and continuously improving how we implement it as well. On an annual basis, we submit to the Global Real Estate Sustainability Benchmark. Last year, that was about a quarter of our private equity AUM. We're also investor members for both our securities and indirects business. We've just a number of accomplishments, whether they are through our GRESB ratings, through asset level certifications like LEED, Energy Star, Neighbors, CASB, BREEAM around the world. You name it, we've experienced it and achieved it. And really, that is only possible because we take our global strategy and policy, and we work at the asset level to implement those initiatives and then meet them somewhere in the middle with our fund management approach. You'll hear from Chris. I'm happy to say CodeGreen is our US sustainability program management consultant and is really helping us achieve a lot of the outcomes that we are achieving here in the Americas. So that's the overview of LaSalle, and look forward to continuing the conversation.
Great, thank you, Eric. And I think it's obvious, good lead in to hear from Chris. We'll hear from Dana in a moment, but Chris, why don't you give an overview of, so I don't know if LaSalle, is it a typical partner or client of yours? And what is your scope of work, and how do you work with the LaSalles of the world?
Sure, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, thanks. Well, glad to be here. Really excited to be part of this panel today. Been working with Stuart for a number of years across a number of topics, and really glad that we were able to make this happen today. So thanks for having me. Eric, thank you for the shout out. Really great to be talking today with Eric and Dana, some leaders in this industry at different scales. So really excited to be part of that conversation. My name is Chris Cayten. I'm a partner and senior director of strategic growth at CodeGreen Solutions. We are an energy and sustainability consulting firm based in New York City. about 12 years old at this point. I can't believe it's been that long, but we work primarily with office building owners and investors, I would say, to help them improve energy efficiency and sustainability, mostly with their existing assets. And what that means, the definition of sustainability has evolved over the 12 years that I've been doing this, primarily as a trajectory of the interest both of the market, which is typically the tenants and occupiers of these large buildings, but also the investors. So we work with folks at all scales and all positions within the capital stack, really to create and develop comprehensive ESG and sustainability programs. And then we have boots on the ground engineering services and consulting services to really drive those programs through each of the assets across these portfolios. So there's really no typical client. There's no typical client like LaSalle to answer that question, but we work with folks of all scales really to help them understand, given their internal team, given their pressures they're getting potentially from investors and from the marketplace, how do we help align and create a sustainability program that's sustainable from a typical approach that they can actually handle, but also to really drive improvements. And what I'll say, before we get into the rest of the conversation, is this definition of sustainability, as I mentioned, has really evolved as the trends really layer on, and I can't imagine what it's like to be head of sustainability over the past 10 years, because every, say, 2 years, a new requirement is put on top of them. I would say, 10 years ago, we started this. You said I had a lead building. Great, you're done. That's it. I have a lead building. I'm great. Maybe 2 years later, they said, now there's this idea of wellness. So you're the head of sustainability. You go make all of our buildings healthy. Now we need wellness. Maybe 3 years, let's say 3 years ago, then on the heels of Sandy and after 2017, which is our largest year of climate destruction across the world from all sorts of natural disasters, climate resilience was piled on top. Now you have to, create a proactive program to prevent climate risk. And now this most recent layer is this idea of indoor air quality and wellness within the buildings on an operational standpoint. So I feel like every 2 years, these heads of ESG get another requirement put on top of them. And we at CodeGreen, we love to stay ahead of that. And we love to be able to provide some long-term view as to what's coming, and then really help industry leaders identify ways to implement, really to reduce risk across all of these areas, ultimately to drive improvements in their sustainability programs, but ultimately it is also about protecting these investments. Our clients are all for-profit organizations that really need to appeal to the market in which they work, and show that they are being proactive about climate risk reduction, and all of the other risks, in addition to being smart investors, right? These are folks who are making smart decisions about acquisitions. Every month they're having to decide about new acquisitions. So CodeGreen really helps with all of those steps in the process. A rapidly evolving market. I love working in it, and happy to be here as part of the discussion.
Great, thanks so much, Chris. And I think you just described a big market basket of responsibility. We'll see how Dana Schneider feels about that, and if in fact she agrees that it has evolved over the years, and she's been in this practice for a long time now, and has a great background and some tremendous work. So Dana, fill us in on what you're doing and the accuracy of Chris's description of the evolution.
Well, Chris's description was certainly accurate, and thanks for having me and all of us together on this panel. We are all friends, so I think it will make this panel more fun for the attendees. I did not put together beautiful slides like Eric, but I'll give some background on Empire State Realty Trust. I am a Senior Vice President and Director of Energy and Sustainability, which, as Christopher said, includes underneath it, energy, sustainability, health, wellness, productivity, engineering, safe return to office, indoor environmental quality, resiliency, reporting, etc. Empire State Realty Trust is a publicly traded company, ESRT, and a leading real estate investment trust. We own, manage, operate, acquire, and reposition office and retail properties, primarily in Manhattan and the greater New York metropolitan area. Our portfolio is over 10 million square feet, and it does include the Empire State Building, the most famous office building in the world. We're headquartered in New York, and we are a leader in sustainability and energy efficiency. One thing that sets ESRT apart is the fact that we work extremely hard to share the lessons that we learn, which Eric and Chris know is something that I really enjoy a lot. Not just figuring it out and doing it, but being allowed, frankly, to share what we find out, whether it's good or bad with the market, and doing a tremendous amount of policy work to inform city, state, and federal policy with the lessons that we learn and what we discover, which I think Chris, Eric, and I all share the same expertise and passion for using what we learn not only for our own company's differentiation, but also making a difference at a larger scale. I came to ESRT full-time in October after 18 years at JLL, which is why I smiled when Eric mentioned it. We worked together as sister companies there. And I was the managing director, head of energy and sustainability for the Americas there. Yeah. Okay. And I've got metrics about Empire State Realty Trust leadership, but it might be more fun to jump into the discussion instead. Okay. You can go to our website if you want to hear how great we are.
I'll shout out and point out.
Stuart, sorry, I did realize that I was remiss in my litany of things that have been piled on top of these folks, which is the last one, which is probably the crux of what we're discussing, this overlap between the current crisis, but also all of these energy and carbon mandates. So I was remiss in not to add that as the capstone to 10 years of green building initiatives across real estate. Literally in the last 2 years, we've seen an explosion of mandates, not just disclosure of energy performance, but now mandates. So that can be the straw that hopefully doesn't kill the camel. But that is a process that now everybody is working, that new paradigm that we're all working in.
Right.
So, look forward to talking more about that.
Yes. And that goes to the question of understanding how we manage COVID and if you are the ones who are managing COVID, and how you're doing that, given not just these voluntary programs, but these mandates. So that just goes into my question: how has COVID generated more work for you and your teams? If not your team, is there some?
I love how you put it.
Is there some other team at your company that's doing this and not you?
Eric, do you want me to go first on that? So COVID-19 has been an interesting challenge for the real estate industry and for everybody personally, of course. So I think any of us would be remiss not to start out by saying it's devastating and it's terrible being New York City based, the loss of life that we've all experienced. So we take it extremely seriously as people come back to work. With the understanding that the office buildings are the first line of defense for a lot of these people. We need to make sure that we are doing everything we can to bring our employees and our occupants, our tenants, our clients, basically, back to an environment that is as safe and healthy as it possibly can be for them. And so, I'm sure Eric will have a lot to add, but I think I can speak for us together. In the efforts that we made from the beginning. So starting in mid-March, when we realized this was happening, the real estate industry immediately came together. We worked together with the Real Estate Roundtable Sustainable Policy Advisory Committee. I have to give them a call out because they convened all of us together from the start to share. That is a really important differentiation about the workload, because in as much as all of us want our companies to be the best, and we know that they are the best in what we do, when it comes to public health and safety, this is somewhere where we share knowledge. And I would say that's in sustainability and energy in general, we share knowledge. So we immediately began developing a plan based on the ways that we know COVID-19 is spread. So it's direct, indirect, and aerosol. Just to simplify, it is spread in all those ways. It is mostly spread by direct, sneezing or particles, but it can be spread in any of those ways. And so until we know exactly how it is done, which we'll never know because coronavirus is the common cold and that's never been solved, we have to address all three. So for direct, we immediately began developing plans that are now rolled out throughout our portfolio. Nobody is allowed in our buildings without a mask. Nobody is allowed in our buildings until they use the hand sanitizer that we have outside the doors and throughout our lobbies. And nobody is allowed in our buildings, at least for now, until they have a temperature scan. All of this aligns with New York State guidance, which for everyone listening is outstanding. You should take a look at it. It's certainly superior than the federal government's guidance and its specificity. I know that's shocking. And so that's the first line of defense. We also have footprints laid out through the lobbies and common areas, elevators of every single building. Don't take for granted how important this is. You know, we're helping people in a very easy, non-panicky way understand how they can safely come into our buildings. And so we have footprints spread 6 feet apart, guiding them to their elevator banks, footprints in the corners of the elevator banks facing the corners just to keep people safe as they come up. So that's been some of the signage, the distancing, the mask wearing, the sanitizing and hand washing. We have signs everywhere around hand washing. We have Captivate screens in elevators with tips on how to stay safe. We had town halls with our tenants. I think we ended up doing 4 of them so far with frequently asked questions, just all tenants available for us to present to them what we were doing, what they could do, what they could expect when they came back. And then we also, from an engineering perspective, developed a detailed program. So, you know, we talked about direct and indirect transmission, which is primarily face mask, social distancing, cleaning. Our cleaning protocol, and Eric knows this as well, I was obsessed with figuring out how to follow guidelines for sanitation and disinfection without harming people. You know, our job is focusing on a safe indoor environmental quality all the time. And so we really pushed for CDC approved COVID-19 proven disinfectants that were also eco-logo wherever possible. So, you know, the last thing you want to do is napalm your building with bleach to kill the COVID. And by the way, everybody gets sick from breathing that in. So we worked very closely with our provider for cleaning services to make sure that what they're using is effective and also safe for humans to breathe in. And then we have the engineering checklist, which is super robust, which gets into the potential aerosol transmission. We don't know if it's really spread that way, but we have to address it. And so on that side, on the air side, increased ventilation, all new MERV 13 filters everywhere. If someone tells you they can't put it in, they're usually wrong. They pretty much can. So all new MERV 13 filters everywhere, increased ventilation everywhere. We already weren't allowing volatile organic compounds to come in, or minimal, if that, and those kinds of measures that Eric and I both took in our portfolios with rules around the chemicals that are not allowed to come in the first place really does matter now, because it creates a safer environment for everyone. And the safer and healthier they are, the less susceptible they are to COVID. And we also have a super robust water purification, which we would be remiss not to address. So you've got to flush out all your systems, clean them, disinfect them, and test for Legionella, pH, chlorine, and temperature. Make sure those are safe.
And all this work is your work, Dana, or is it work of facilities operations and management, which is another team?
Together. So we convened a task force immediately. I should have said that in the mid-March, an ESRT task force. And so I'm on that as energy, sustainability, engineering, health, and wellness piece. Our head of HR, our head of property management, and all of our portfolio managers, our head of security, our head of risk management, all meet every morning at 9 for an hour to talk about our return to office plan, which evolved, you know, as you said, not only to include COVID-19, but then evolved to include safety during protests, safety during looting, safety during lots of things that we never thought we'd have to deal with. But that task force, we shared what the task force came up with as part of the Real Estate Roundtable work.
Okay, great. Eric, so you were involved in the Roundtable as well, and you're hearing from the Dana Schneiders of the world, and they're responding to your request. What do your requests look like, and how has your work changed to focus on that and taking it away? Has it taken away from your work in sustainability?
Sure. So first, you know, I think Empire State Realty Trust has a fantastic example for what buildings are doing as they prepare for reopening and the operating guidelines that they're setting. I'm going to pull a few themes from what Dana said and not get into all those details, because they're doing an amazing amount of things.
Right. Yes.
You know, I think health and safety, health and wellness are themes that have been trending in real estate in the past 2 years, I would say, more so than ever. And that spotlight is just being shown on real estate even more based on what we're seeing with COVID-19. You know, where before you would get a tenant who would ask, you know, what is your building doing in indoor air quality? Or, you know, maybe a tenant saying, do you have a health and wellness certification here and there? You know, we're going to start seeing it from more and more tenants across our portfolio, especially office tenants, as they look to lease buildings for future spaces. And who knows what the future of office space is going to look like. But certainly, you know, we're very much expecting health and wellness to be a major key consideration for any companies looking to lease space going forward. So that's been one of the areas that I've been assisting LaSalle and continuing to bolster our focus on health and wellness. You know, we've been looking at something like the Fitwell rating system across our multifamily portfolio because it aligns easily to our investment strategy. And now we're going to have to take that and apply it to other property types and really be sharing with our tenants, you know, as Dana said, what we're doing in this space from the perspective of keeping them healthy and keeping them safe in our buildings and making them comfortable. Mm-hmm. I also want to highlight, you know, what Dana was talking about with operations and operation strategies. With so many of our, especially office buildings, being, you know, pretty dark, right, from tenants not choosing to occupy their office space during this time, and for employees to be in quarantine. We've been operating all of our buildings in after hours mode. So we've been seeing a 20 to 30% decrease in energy consumption at the majority of our office buildings. Now, conversely, in our multifamily buildings, where everyone is under quarantine in the building, we've been seeing, you know, 20 to 30% increases in energy consumption usage. Our industrial buildings remain largely open. They were, you know, for the most part deemed essential businesses because they're distribution warehouses. And then for retail, we typically are an owner of grocery anchored shopping centers. So the grocers were going gangbusters and doing great. And we had to help them ensure that they had, you know, the proper operational processes in place, you know, for that onslaught of people that may be coming in, any lines that would form outside of their stores. So, you know, similar to things that Dana's done, we assisted grocers in creating, you know, separation of space and for people to wait and things like that. But then all of the smaller tenants, you know, were closed down, right? So there was a huge balance that our asset managers were doing in, especially our retail asset managers, and working with the tenants to ensure that they could maintain their businesses from a cash flow perspective, and working with them to, you know, defer their rent and being socially conscious in that manner. And then, you know, a number of other issues that we dealt with grocers or with multifamily buildings. You know, multifamily buildings in quarantine, we had to shut down all of our gyms and all of our common area facilities. We had to increase common area cleaning, as Dana was talking about. We had to look to change out, you know, filters and all the things that Dana said. So we really had to think about the strategies on a per property type basis. And together with our asset management leadership team, we were really looking at that. I'll also say there's a number of industry resources out there, whereas RER SPAC did an amazing job of pulling them all together. You know, we at LaSalle are really leveraging, again, the Center for Active Design resources. And if anyone hasn't checked those out, I highly recommend them. You know, things that we're talking about increased ventilation, changing out your filters, you know, cleaning practices, and then even into mental health issues are all in those resources. So being the person at LaSalle that has my finger on that pulse and sharing those resources with our asset management and property management teams has been incredibly important in developing a consistent response across our portfolio.
Yeah. Okay.
From a pure sustainability perspective, I will say, you know, some of the tenants that we've been working with on rent deferrals, if you know, for assets that we acquired where we weren't in control of the leasing, it's actually given us a nice opportunity to go back and discuss with those tenants, you know, what our sustainability priorities are, and add in some green lease language to those leases, which has been successful in a handful of cases where landlord and tenant are going to do a better job at sharing ESG information going forward. For spotlighting COVID, the health and safety takes priority with the tenants, and that's what they come back and ask us about. But then, for our purposes, as we get into the discussion on climate change, having access to tenant data is extremely helpful, not only for reporting, but also for how we plan for the future in terms of efficiency upgrades and CapEx in general. So that's been a nice kind of side benefit, I will say, of this, is enhanced collaboration with the tenants.
I wonder if that actually feeds into a question, or let me put it as a statement, and you tell me, any of you, if you agree or not, which is that your work in sustainability, which has always made you innovative and functional across borders or across boundaries, has prepared you and made you the right recipient of the task of responding to COVID-19, because as I said, you've been innovative and you've been collaborative where other teams might otherwise work more in silos.
It's an interesting question. I think it prepared us well in a lot of ways, actually. Those of us who've been doing this for a long time, 10 or 20 years, have been through a lot. Just to be direct with the audience here who is interested, obviously, in sustainability. When I was first studying sustainable design in college, people didn't even know what that meant. Right. And that was in the late 90s. And so we've come very far, but we've not come far enough. So I think that those of us who focus on this, like Eric and Chris and myself, we are used to doing a ton of research to make sure that what we're recommending is the right thing. I think we're used to pushing really hard to make a business case for things where other people don't see how it's required. And I think that prepared us very well. I also think that our work was already focused on safe and healthy environments. And so it positioned us very well to really kind of know right away what we should do. Mm-hmm. So even in advance of the guidance, which again was very delayed at an official, even state level, because there's so much litigation involved in something this risky, and I understand that. We didn't have the luxury of that. We had to come up with our plans immediately. And although those plans evolved and continue to evolve as we learn about COVID-19, this group of people had to be on our feet day one saying, all right, what do we do? I think that we were very well prepared given the focus on engineering, metrics, the value of proven third-party verification, and the impact of indoor environmental quality, and its ties not only to materials in a space, right, the chemicals that get introduced, as well as the engineering side and the water side, air, water, is all tied together on the impact on human health. So I think that what we've been doing for the last 20 years prepared us, unfortunately, to deal with an emergency like this.
Yeah, I mean, I would add to that. I think that, looking at the clientele that we work with, the organizations that have had a long-standing ESG program, sort of like what you said, because that cross-pollinates to all of these areas that are sometimes separate from the pure financial metrics that are used to evaluate property, like Dana said, in terms of energy, carbon, indoor air quality. Because of these ESG programs that have an ongoing practice, typically, like with our clients, typically it's quarterly, where you're gathering all this data and then you're disseminating it out back to decision makers. That structure allowed organizations that already had an ESG program in place to say, hey, let's take our next meeting and let's discuss some of these areas that are really crucial to COVID and how we're preparing for it. So because they've already built that network of folks into each of these departments, it did allow those folks, even when there was a lack of information, at least to be gathering, even with a lack of guidance, at least they were gathering the information, the incoming information, in a very structured way, and then able to make decisions with good data. I think one benefit of, like I said, with clients that have been doing this for a while, is the idea of increased transparency of operational data. sometimes into the organization, sometimes back out to stakeholders and investors. But that flow and the fact that we, over many years and sometimes painful process of where do we get the data, how do we get it, how often do we get it, is the data accurate? Once you've worked through those pieces, making decisions, clearly it's a difficult decision to make given crisis like this, but if you've already set up the infrastructure to gather and verify data, it makes that process that much easier. So I do think organizations who have had a good ESG program could definitely leverage all of that hard work and networks that have been built to be able to at least be more prepared with the information and how to make actions, based on it.
It sounds to me like if Eric and Dana were to agree with what Chris just said, that your programs are, whether you design them or not, your COVID programs, they're built to last because they're part of pre-existing programs that have been around for a long time, as Chris said, have evolved and taken on new responsibilities, and that these programs and the focus on the work on COVID can persist while also pursuing the other attributes of your ESG, which is environmental social governance, or CSR, corporate social responsibility mandates. Can you comment on that, anyone?
Yeah, I would say quickly, I certainly hope that people don't have to continue to face the corners of elevators or can't use the gyms.
Yes.
Like family business, that is not built to last, but is still in place. But certainly, as I alluded to before, health and wellness has been on the rise the past couple of years, and I think now more so than ever, it is just here to stay. Right? These practices, green cleaning has been part of LEED buildings, but as Dana mentioned, we now have an increased cleaning standard that we need to uphold in our buildings, and we need to marry that with not using harmful chemicals just to kill coronavirus. But it has to marry what we've been doing for coronavirus and go back to ensuring health, wellness, and safety as part of our buildings. So it's definitely here to stay. I just hope it's all the best aspects of it, and there's a vaccine sooner rather than later, and we can start to leverage those best practices and get away from some of the craziness that has ensued.
I would also just add that the issue and how it's being dealt with, at least within really all property types, but primarily office in which we work, is that how organizations are addressing COVID is kind of a paradigm for sustainability as well, which we really see. There's always two sides to sustainability initiatives. You need to make the improvements, you have to implement the operational improvements, but often to get the full credit of that, you also need to figure out how to effectively message that to the accurate stakeholders. So it's really interesting with COVID, we have clients calling in saying, well, how can you help me in my building do the right thing? But also, how can you help me message to my stakeholders, potentially most typically my tenants, that I've done the right thing? Like, what is the right message? How detailed do I get? How technical do I get? So, just like certifications and third party, and I know, Eric has mentioned some Fitwell, and there's also WELL certification. So this idea of doing the right thing, but figuring out how to communicate that, and Dana alluded to it as well, third-party programs that have been around for a while are a great resource to be able to say, yes, we're doing the right thing, and here's a group, don't take my word for it, here's a group that's an expert in it, and we can put a badge on it. So it's interesting, just like sustainability, all of us could be doing great work behind the scenes. If it never got out, you wouldn't really actually get the full value of the initiatives that are being performed. So I think in a way, this mirrors that same paradigm that we have with general sustainability, but even in a more acute fashion, which is do the right thing, but also we need to make sure that people know that we're doing the right thing.
Yeah, the idea of communication is an interesting one, and I have a couple of opinions on that I think that I would love to hear Chris and Eric's opinion on. So we want to be very transparent with our occupants, and that's why we've put out, we have memos and the FAQs and the signage. It's also been very interesting being a point person for them to come back and say, what about HEPA filters? And should we have 100% outside air? And, they're all reading this crazy stuff and having to explain, that I have the filters for a hospital, and that really only works in a whole part of a whole system that's designed to do these things, and getting into the nuances of pressurization, things you never thought you'd talk about with a tenant. But I think that another piece is third-party rating systems are very good guidelines in a lot of ways, but I would be very careful because just because your building is LEED certified or WELL certified or Fitwel certified, all of which are great programs, does not mean they have a safe program for a COVID return. And that's something that we've talked about a lot as well. And as much as I love those guys and we know them all, you know, all of us, I know Chris, Eric, and I have all reached out to them and said, like, be a little careful with your marketing because you could be a WELL certified building. It doesn't mean that you specifically did the filtration that you need or the outside air that you need or the sanitation that you need or the distancing you need or the support that you need to make sure you're safe on a return. Certainly not the water stuff, right? And the water side is not to be ignored. I know it's not as visible to everybody. It's literally invisible, but we have to be very careful. So even though, you know, Center for Active Design, Eric is right, put out some great guidelines. WELL has a new program now that they're selling to certify your building to say that you did all this stuff. And I was like, fine, I'll do it for free. I'm not paying you to check what we did. And I think it's important to be careful sometimes around making sure that you came up with a comprehensive plan. But what the harder part is actually making sure all the buildings do it and do it accurately and follow, you know, every one of these things. We actually developed a tracking sheet for every filter in every building to make sure they changed them to the new ones. And I think that, you know, Eric would really appreciate it because both of us deal with properties. It's one thing to have a policy. It's another one to make sure everything is done consistently throughout a portfolio. And that is extremely difficult and very challenging. And it's something I think that I'm really proud of ESRT for making sure that that happened. I'm really proud of my engineers for doing a lot of extra work because it was one thing for me to be like, you should do these things. And they were the ones that did all the hard work of implementing them. So we have to give those guys a huge shout out, you know, coming in every day and making sure the buildings were safe and that they never went down. The third piece I wanted to say was the energy, that unexpected silver lining of this, because you have to try to come up with something positive out of all this bad stuff. It gave us all an opportunity to study energy use in our buildings. Eric mentioned, he saw a 20 to 30% energy use decline. Similarly, we saw like 24 to 28% energy decline. We would have all expected that to be much greater in buildings which remained open, but were largely, unoccupied is not the right word. 300 people out of 15,000, 1% occupancy, which is still what we see in some assets. And looking into the impact of vampire loads, all that equipment is still plugged in. We did audits and walkthroughs of all of our big tenant spaces throughout these 3 months, and we saw monitors on reflecting what somebody was doing at home. All the pantry equipment still on and plugged in. That's crazy. Set points that were nowhere near what they had to be for the month's heating and cooling that we were dealing with. Servers that aren't controlled at all. They're running full power 24/7. It's amazing how many opportunities there are for better energy efficiency and the lessons that we learned from this unexpected opportunity to study loads. And Eric and I are both, again, as part of the Real Estate Roundtable partnership, working with the EPA Energy Star team to give them data and analyze not only what this means for benchmarking, but also what it means for opportunities in buildings. We are nowhere near doing enough in partnership with our tenants. So I think that that's a huge part of what comes next.
If I could unpack the variety of things that you just touched on and visit so many of them, because there are all so many meaningful comments that have just been made. And I think one of the most interesting ones, which goes back to years of trepidation I've had about the certification and the labeling programs, which was wondering how useful they were. The comments that you and Chris just made me feel like if they help you communicate what you've achieved, even if you didn't achieve these things because of the programs, but if they help you communicate your achievement, then they're incredibly useful for that reason alone. That's a very interesting insight. And it really speaks to understanding or trying to unpack what's driving our persistence in focusing on these issues. And is it the achievement, or would we not pursue the achievement if we didn't communicate, if we didn't have a tool such as a labeling program to communicate it effectively? So I think that was very interesting what you said. Eric, what you were shaking your head on and off there, mostly yes. So I wondered if you had something else that you wanted to add there to what Dana was saying.
I think she's right on. You really summarized that point well, so I don't have much more to add there. Certifications are needed and meaningful, but showing your tenants and working with your tenants is the most important.
Okay. Do you think that that there will be a diminution in the mandates? Chris spoke earlier about the mandates, and in New York City, we certainly have mandates associated with the Climate Mobilization Act. But if and there are mandates in other regions across the country, if public administrations are short on tax dollars and are having to cut programs, do you think that there will be a draw away from the focus on these sustainability programs as a result of lack of public funding of these public mandates?
Sure.
I don't think anybody thinks that's going to happen. No, I would just say that I would hope, or I would believe that at all levels, at city, state, potentially federal, maybe we get a change there soon. That private and public groups are going to have to think about how to combine sustainability measures with rebuilding measures with other types of equity and job creation, so that if you're a city faced with energy reductions, carbon reductions, meeting Paris goals, but you're also a city faced with how do I create more jobs, how do I bring people back, same on the private sector, right? If the whole, say the whole restaurant sector, the whole retail sector, as they're bringing those jobs back, I think there is going to have to be smarter decision making to align sustainability and carbon reduction goals with some other economic development goals. So it may not be, the types of laws we've had have been boom time laws, which just said, hey, just meet this, no matter how you do it, just meet this target. I think we may start to see some better or hope to see some better coordinated policies that say, hey, you still need to meet these climate goals. They're not going anywhere, but we need to figure out how to rebuild and create, more sustainable jobs and bring the economy back at the same time, because a lot of cities are going to have both of those challenges, being faced. And I think they're not going to be able to ignore one, and they're probably not going to have the funding to do both of them totally separately. They're going to have to think about them more coordinated fashion than they have in the past.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is actually a really good example, Stuart, of what you asked about earlier. What has the type of challenges we faced in the past, and what has our work in the past, how has it prepared us for what's coming next? And I think this is exactly what it has prepared us for. And it has prepared the more progressive governments of, like New York City or Miami or San Francisco or LA or Chicago are much more prepared for what's coming next, as in the legislation's passed. This has to get done. The cities have taken the lead in this, and I think you can also look to European and Australian examples here for legislation driving a requirement for change, but it is our job to figure out how to make that effective. And so our challenges in the past of having to prove why we should exist, right, is very ROI driven. And everything we've focused on for years has come down to not, greenwashing, talking about the business case for what we do. There is a very clear way to make an economic business case for the environmental and social work that we do. It's our job to make that case to the CFOs, not only of our own companies, but of our investors. And I think that that's exactly what we'll have to do now. I think that if we're unfortunately headed for an economic downturn, which I hope we're not, but it seems like we may be, reinvestment in existing assets is exactly what you do in an economic downturn, and the local job creation that they drive is something that we're all going to have to focus on anyway. And the social justice side of this matters a lot too. These are a lot of our work is just for Eric and I in particular is in cities. And so what we will do will be, I think climate change is one of the most important social justice issues. It absolutely impacts poor people the most. And so what we're doing on energy reductions, which is emissions reductions, which also happens to have some of the best ROI business case behind it, is exactly what we've been preparing for all this time.
Interesting. Eric, did you want to comment on that?
These guys are making the points.
Is your portfolio, Eric, as urban as, I mean, Dana's ESRT is largely in Manhattan. Is your portfolio largely so urban centered and large city centered? And does the demands on you differ across the different types of locales?
Yeah, absolutely. We are definitely urban centric. We invest in markets that we think are either strong or in growth mode still. In some areas we are more on the urban fringe because we think there are benefits of being there. But certainly we're affected by all of the local regulations around the country. So, our investment strategy across, just highlighting office, for instance, in New York City, we have a handful of buildings, and we're actually taking over a building right now downtown that isn't going to meet the 2030 Climate Mobilization Act target, right? So it does meet 2024, but will not meet 2030. We have a number of buildings in Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C.'s energy efficiency ordinance was supposed to be based on 2020 performance, and that's getting thrown off a little bit. So our folks talking about that, and we're working with those folks that are talking about that, about potentially shifting it to 2019 baseline for their energy efficiency reductions. In San Francisco, we're assessing our portfolios to when we're going to have to be on 100% renewable power. We're typically in the choice programs already and making those decisions where they are financially viable, but we have to look at that further now. And then Chicago, LA, all of the cities around the country that are implementing these types of laws, we absolutely have to look at them. So for us, when we underwrite new acquisitions or when we're preparing to deploy CapEx for our ones, as Dana said, there's an ROI to high efficiency. And I think all that COVID is going to really do is also have us put a spotlight on how high efficiency equipment improves health outcomes, right? So when you're upgrading a chiller, when you're upgrading air systems, when you're upgrading a BMS, there's absolutely health outcomes there that we haven't probably spotlighted as much as we've looked at those things, because to Dana's point, we've proved our worth by showing the ROI, spending 5% incrementally more on a high efficient system, piece of equipment that will result in 15% savings, whether it's to us or our tenants, which we can recruit, through rent or common area expenses, has been great. And now I think it's going to be on the folks like us, on the folks like Chris, who are working with their clients to quantify some of the health and wellness benefits of these upgrades as well, that we either have to make due to local regulation, and I agree with Chris, I hope some federal ones change in the near future, but we're really going to have to take a closer look at how the implications on health and wellness as well.
How does the increase in demand for health and wellness, particularly I guess the introduction of greater quantities of outside air, coincide or conflict with the energy efficiency requirements that you're also under?
Right. Dana can probably answer this better than I can from the engineering perspective.
Well, Dana's smiling because she's really wants to enjoy your answer, I think.
I'm looking at Eric, yeah.
Well, I think the point I just made, you really have to have efficient systems in place. If you have to bring in greater outside air and condition more air, there's obviously an increased energy component of that, right? So if you don't have efficient systems in place, it is going to result in increased energy consumption. But if you are using, efficient equipment and upgrading your buildings where it's not, then you'll continue to achieve energy efficiency.
Well, that's another.
And I would just add to that I think one thing that's interesting is, even if these buildings had long wish lists of things they wanted to do to move towards efficiency, move towards 21st century buildings, the idea of a quote unquote smart building has always been this holy grail. A lot of our clients have thrown a ton of money at putting sensors all over their buildings now for air quality, which for better or for worse, they will be useful down the line for a lot of things. They will, you can use CO2 to as a proxy for population. So it's an interesting point in time where some of these investments, even though maybe they were done too shotgun, maybe they were done too quickly, without enough research of which equipment they're putting in, which I know there's a lot of snake oil out there with these types of sensors, so beware. But this idea, dovetailing off of what Eric said, is the smarter your building is, you can make up those efficiencies. So say you're bringing in more outdoor air, if you're controlling that, you know where the people are, you know when they are, those populations, which you do need some sensors for, you can come back or better than what your energy efficiency was before you brought in that extra outdoor air. So you need to have a smarter building, and we have clients who have been spent some upwards of $1 million in the last 2 months to leapfrog into being smarter buildings, which is, like I said, a good long-term investment if they make good equipment choices.
But to directly answer your question, Stuart, yes, outside air increases like we're doing right now absolutely increase energy usage. Especially bringing in more outside air in the hot, humid summer is not ideal. It is absolutely not what you'd ever want to do for energy efficiency. We should just say it. We've been working to balance indoor air quality with efficiency for decades. Right now, we're in an emergency state. So, of course, if more outside air can possibly save even one person's life in a building, you're going to do that right now. I think all of us are following the data to see if there's any scientific data to support that this could be spread through HVAC systems. That's really important to know, because if it is not spread through HVAC systems, which is possible, then we shift our focus away from increased outside air to mitigate this and focus more on other things. I'll also say that, smart buildings it's a fun buzzword. Having a lot of data is great. I think we need to be really strategic when we do that. And even things like indoor environmental quality sensors, which we've been doing for a long time, and we're testing new sensors and new real-time IEQ monitoring technologies that are coming out. And I think it's definitely important. But keep in mind, if the messaging has to be accurate. So, I've talked to our tenants and said, IEQ, indoor environmental quality, is a big focus for us. Here are all the things we do to make indoor environmental quality as healthy as it can be for you. But if you're not measuring particulate matter, between 0.3 and 0.8 microns, then you're not measuring viruses. And so I think it's really important, which is another thing I was saying about these rating systems. Nobody was ever looking at, unless you're a hospital, nobody was looking at particles of that size. Right. And I think that's okay. I think it's important for everyone to be honest about it. Otherwise,
okay, good.
We put people in danger.
Yes. Well, that's an important caveat and important reality check. We are at the bottom of the hour, so I do need to wrap up. My quarter is about to expire on the machine that I plugged in that keeps this thing running. I want to thank everyone again. Chris, Dana, and Eric, for your participation, your willingness to participate in the call, to plan for the call, and perhaps we'll have a follow-up call 6 months from now when there's a vaccine out and everyone is a little less stressed about the new things on the marketplace, and we'll see what we can talk about then. So thank you all very much, and thank you for the very active audience. And I'm sorry we didn't get to any questions, but we had such a robust conversation. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Stuart.
Thank
Thank
you,
you, Eric and Dana. Thanks a lot. Have a good day.
Wow, thanks for having us.
Everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.